Hi, everyone. This is a new narration for landscape and outdoor uses that accompanies a PowerPoint that I often show in our in-person classes. So keep in mind that in California, about 50 to 70% of our water goes for outdoor uses. That number really spikes in Southern California in the summer months, primarily between, say, late May and late October. At that time, it can be as much as 80 to 85% of outdoor all water use. That is the water that we purchase or pump, treat, and distribute goes for outdoor uses. Do keep in mind the 55% number there for Nevada. The test that you'll be taking is for Nevada and California. That might be on there. So I just want you to be aware of that. We're going to briefly cover these topics in the following slides: grouping plants according to needs, which is hydrozoning, the WooCall website, it used to be a book, limiting turf, efficient irrigation, soils, mulch, and how important regular maintenance is to any landscape. These landscapes are not no maintenance, they're just a little bit lower maintenance. So dirt essentially is part of this triumvirate, right? Plants plus soil plus water. Plants provide erosion control. They obviously have a root system that does this, and they support biological activity both below and above ground. Soil or dirt has minerals, pore spaces for um, biological development, as you've got to have air spaces underneath the ground, as well as water storage. This all contributes to root development of the plant. And water acts as a mineral transport system. This makes sense when you think about if you use a systemic fertilizer on a plant, you put it into the soil below the plant. Every time you water it, it dissolves and it gets sucked up into the plant through this mineral transport or chemical transport. It aids the plant metabolism. It's very important in structural support. I'm sure you would recognize this when a plant dies, it falls over when it's not getting enough water, and that's because water actually provides structural support. We already talked about chemical transport, and then water, of course, serves as a cooling mechanism through evapotranspiration. So just like we sweat, plants also sweat, but we call it evapotranspiration. Soil can be classified into these different categories. Clay, which is the smallest particle size, it holds water the best, but it has the highest runoff potential. Silt, which is medium particle size, it has good permeability, but it does not run off like sand, which is the largest particle size. This might be a test question. Like test question might be, what's the largest particle size? And you're going to say, oh, I know that's sand because I watched this narration and PowerPoint display. It is the most permeable. Knowing your soil type is important for irrigation scheduling and plant selection, although the more native you go, the less important it is because they are highly adapted to whatever we already have. People do add amendments like compost, fertilizer, topsoil. Again, the more drought tolerant and specifically the more native your plant selection is, the less this is necessary. It is always important to irrigate efficiently, not that they are in this picture. You want a separate valve for each hydrozone. My best example of this is my trees in my own yard. I have three of the same type of drought tolerant tree. They are on a separate valve, even though they are spread out far in my yard, because trees need different watering than my shrubs, for example. So you want to program each valve independently on your controller, or if you don't have a controller, you know already that you're going to have to irrigate them differently. Rotary nozzle um, can be very efficient. You can have efficient irrigation even if it's not drip irrigation. Some plants actually don't like drip irrigation. Um, but you may need to use rotary nozzles. Again, you can pick up very efficient rotary nozzles. You can pick them up at big box stores. You are better off going to an irrigation supplier. You want to use low volume systems for trees and shrubs. You're going to irrigate a lot longer. They're very low volume, allowing the water to soak into the soil. You always want to water according to the plant needs. Even with drought tolerant plants, not every plant type needs the same water. Within the native group, that is also true, of course. Yarrow, for example, yarrow, it needs more water than Texas privet, okay, um, which is endemic to this area also. So it just depends on the plant type. You need to be aware of your plant types. You want to use weather-based or soil moisture-based scheduling. This can be a little tricky. You have to set your controller properly to manage your water properly. It's not a set it and forget it. And on slopes in particular, you want to repeat cycles to eliminate runoff. You want to cycle and soak. You might want to run it for 5 minutes and then let it soak for 30 and then run it for 10 and let it soak for 30 to avoid that heating off of a slope. Evapotranspiration versus rainfall. The highest, remember that this is set for grass, number one. This is not set for native plants, drought tolerant plants, even anything in between. This is set specifically for grass. And in grass world, the highest plant water demand is during the lowest periods of rainfall in California and in Nevada also. Nevada gets a little bit more summer irrigation in some areas in northern Nevada. So you can see on this chart that in June, July, and August, you need to apply a lot more water, and that's when we don't get any rain. Now, the converse of this is true. All right. And I'm going to draw a little map here, a little thing here. Whoops, it's the wrong color. I want it in red. For a native or drought tolerant plants, it goes like this, right? They need less water in the summer. They want essentially no water in the summer if it's a native plant. So you have to be very aware that this particular thing, most controllers come set up with a basically with a grass setting. You're going to have to adjust that manually. This is EP versus rainfall, and it's a pretty important concept right there. What goes along with that last slide is the CIMA station. That is the California Irrigation Management Information System. It is also set for grass, right? It measures how much irrigation or water needs to be applied to well-watered 4-inch tall grass. That's what they grow under a CIMA station. And it works on by measuring the things on the right. Solar radiation, soil temperature, air temperature, wind direction, wind speed, and precipitation. And then it gives you a number which is communicated to your weather-based irrigation controller via computer and Wi-Fi, or it works on your weather-based irrigation controller might work on historical data for that period of time. Most of us have upgraded to one that is live time, right? So it measures what grass needs, and then it goes to your controller, and depending on how you've set your controller, waters appropriately. Okay. Limit stations are throughout all of California. You should probably be able to even look up the information online for your most local one. There is also something called a reference ETO. So, and before I get any further, there's also a K2O, which is a crop coefficient. So we have ETO for regular people, grass and plants, and then we have KTO, right, for crop. So it's the same concept either way. They compare, again, everything to well-watered grass that's 4 inches to 6 inches tall, okay? And it's measured by the CIMA stations everywhere. And it is what we set our reference number for. So you might see on the test KTO. KTO is the crop coefficient. Now we talked about valves earlier, but this is kind of goes along with that, and that is hydrozones. When people set up their landscapes and set up their irrigation, for example, they might still have a large expanse of grass, any sort of grass. That is a separate hydrozone. If you were to have cactus in that same landscape, that would be a separate hydrozone. Okay, you want to group them together. Now, they may not appear grouped on the surface, right? Like you might have cactus spread throughout your landscape, but you want to water them on one valve. So you might run the drip line that's watering those from cactus to cactus to cactus throughout your landscape. They're going to talk to the controllers if they're one station or one place. You are going to do that with every plant that has a water need similar to another plant. So, for example, California natives need typically less water in the summer. Even if they're spread throughout your landscape, again, just like cactus, they're going to be on the same hydrozone that talks to your controller because they don't want summer water. Summer water kills most of them. So they're not going to get watered during the summer, whereas your roses, which might be there too, need water all summer long. It's just the idea of grouping like plants to be watered appropriately. That's it. Now, you need to think of turf basically as an oasis. If you have turf anywhere in your landscape, okay, it's going to be on its own valve as well, or maybe multiple valves if you need. So, the other thing you want to look at with hydrozoning is microclimates. No matter where you live, you're going to have microclimates within your own landscape. In my case, I have one particular corner that gets beat to death by the sun all summer long. Okay, it gets sun from the time the sun comes up till the time the sun comes down. It's that spot. It's super hot. So that is a microclimate. I had to put a bulletproof plant in that spot, but I also have to remember that that plant might need a little bit more irrigation. So you need to look at hydrozones and microclimates. These are just concepts that you need to understand. Plant selection is very important, as is almost everything else. So I can't tell you that it's more important than everything else. You can you can do the best job on irrigation, but if you don't select plants properly, it might be ugly and your plants might die. On the other hand, you can do the best job on plant selection, and if you don't do your irrigation efficiently, you might not save water and your plants might die. All of this goes in hand in hand. The difference with plants is they're what's in your yard. That's the primary purpose of your landscape, right? It's to make your house look nice. People don't drive by your house and say, "Wow, look at that irrigation system." But they may drive by your house and say, "Wow, that is a beautiful yard," right? That's because of the plants that you put in it. So you want to always choose plants. Now, this is grass aside. You might have a need for some grass. So let's talk about plants, not grass. Grass is later. You want to choose plants that are good in your locality. And your locality might be different from somebody even 10 miles away. You might get a little bit more sun, a little bit of frost. You need to look at your own location specifically, right? You can't rely on things even 10 miles away. You need to know your local soil conditions. I worked for a city where they had a huge amount of rocks naturally occurring in their soil. They were in the foothills of the Mount Baldy area, and they had a lot of rocks. So you had to plant plants that could find their way around the rock. Different where I lived in Riverside, where this was primarily farmland for a reason, there's not a lot of rocks. So I need to plant plants that do well here. So you want to choose these plants that are adapted to your local conditions. Always go native when possible. Drought tolerant plants behave very differently than native plants. No invasive species. And I don't think I have to tell anybody right now that low flammability is really key. Really key. Avoid anything that has oil in it, right? There are a lot of plants that we sell, like eucalyptus trees, for example. There's eucalyptus oil. Okay, a lot of things that are promoted in nurseries, like cypress, they have an oily feel to them. Those are highly flammable. So consider flammability. There's a lot of lists out there where you can look for plants that are not flammable. This is a particularly good plant, but those are bad pictures. That happens to be a California grape. And you can see that really ugly block wall behind it. That now is completely covered by this beautiful, beautiful vine that produces grapes too. This is a picture of the Wu Calls book from 2014. Nobody publishes a book anymore. You can go right on their website. Just Google Wu Calls, and you will find an incredibly great resource that has hydrozoning information. It has plant factors in it, and it it's just they're adding more plants constantly, and it is based on anecdotal information, which I find very interesting. So you have all these people like me, who are like plant people, and they communicate information to this is done by the University of California. They communicate this information. I have this plant in this location. It looks this good, and this is how much I water it. And through that, they establish these plant factors. And you can see the plant factors in toward the end of the slide, right? A high plant factor would be grass, 70 to 90% of ETO, right? Which is the comparison number, right, that we looked at earlier. Moderate is 40 to 60, low is 10 to 30, and very low is less than 10. Cactus and native plant are in the 10 to 30% range. I have never seen a plant be in the very low range. Okay. Even roses are in the 40 to 60% range. So that's a moderate water use, right? But most natives and cactus are in the 10 to 30% range. Now we translate that into a plant factor. So it would be for high zero point 0.7 to zero point 0.9, moderate would be zero point 0.4 to zero point 0.6, and low would be zero point 0.1 to zero point 0.3. That's our plant factor number that you see in the water budget formula. Okay, that's where that comes from, is from WUCALS. Turf, used sparingly. If you have children or dogs, you're probably going to have some turf. I think you should have some turf for those two items. The rest of you might not have a need for it, but you might just want it. So remember to use it as an oasis plant. Okay. You want it in small areas because it still needs a lot of irrigation. It is almost always the highest water using plant in your landscape. When we talk about plant factors, drought tolerance being zero point 0.1 to zero point 0.3, turf is usually zero point 0.8 or zero point 0.9, gives you, so it's 3 times as much water. It can be really hard to irrigate on parkways and berms and medians. We all know that. So it's not a good location for turf. Um, Turf needs its own hydrozone. Otherwise, you're going to end up watering everything, a lot of water to keep your turf alive, and the other stuff might die. And there are turf substitute plants out there, but they're not that great, right? So there's Diamondia, which does not look like turf, but it does pretty well in medium traffic. There's Thyme, which is a great ground cover. It can tolerate a little bit of traffic. Neither of those, however, can tolerate dogs or a lot of traffic from children. Carapia is very popular right now. It can tolerate a higher amount of traffic. It also needs more water and is a lot more prone to weeds. So there are turf substitute plants out there. In my opinion, if you need turf, just water it properly and get yourself some grass. Just a small amount of grass and water it properly. I it, if you have kids and dogs, that's the only way to go. That's a California buckwheat there, by the way. That's a really great native plant. So this is important for your test. Perth is divided into two categories, cool season and warm season. Cool season grasses are evergreen. Okay, they're the ones that we think of with when we think of Southern California in particular, and you're going to have to water the heck out of them in the summer. Warm season grasses go dormant in the winter. They turn brown, a little bit brown, but they use a lot less water than cool season grasses. That being said, all grass uses more water than drought tolerant or native plant. Here's how cool season grass grows. Remember these types because there's going to be a test question for sure that says Kentucky bluegrass is a cool season grass or a warm season grass. And you're going to say, it's a cool season grass. I know that because I watched the narration and PowerPoint. It might be ryegrass they ask you about. It might be tall fescue grass, but I guarantee you there is going to be a question on the difference between cool season and warm season grasses. I want you to look at how this, these particular grasses grow. They start in the winter, they're kind of quiet. In spring, they really grow. Midsummer, they kind of quiet down again, and they regrow again in the fall, although not to the levels they grow in spring. They look green year round. And you can see the root growth, right? If it's growing on top, it's growing on the bottom. So you can see the root growth follows that same cycle. Now let's look at the warm season, which I want you to notate their names. Bermuda is the most common one. St. Augustine, zoysia, and buffalo grass are the same. So when somebody tells you, oh, buffalo grass is a wonderful drought tolerant grass, it is in the same category as other warm season grasses, as it is not much better. It also doesn't look much better. Okay, it doesn't look really any different than the other warm season grasses. It's slow to grow. It's going to go somewhat dormant in the winter. Nothing looks as good as Kentucky bluegrass, especially if you're living in Kentucky. So the warm season grasses start out, you can see that they do not have the growth on either the top or the bottom that the cool season grasses have. They grow in spring, they grow crazy in summer, they start to die back in fall, and they're very, very quiet in the summer, or I mean in the winter. They don't have this regrowth. So if there's a test question about warm season grasses, now you know why. Nothing will help you reduce water more than adding mulch to your landscape. Now, there are different kinds of mulch. Right here, I'm talking about the traditional wood mulch, not rubber mulch and not pebbles. Never use rubber mulch. Bad idea. Bad for the environment. Bad idea. Pebbles, rocks, whatever else you might use as mulch is fine to use in certain applications, but it's going to heat up your soil. It's also, if you use enough of it, going to heat up the area around your house or wherever the application is. And the worst thing is it's going to make it can be very ugly. You don't want to just do that. Pebbles, boulders, rocks, they're great in limited application, but you don't want to just have a rock landscape. Wood mulch is really the best. If you put down a 2 to 4 inch layer over your soil surface, you can reduce your water by 30% that day. That's how much difference it makes. It regulates the soil temperature, it reduces weeds, it reduces evaporation from the soil, it reduces runoff, it reduces soil compaction. I can't say enough about it. And it does look nice, I think. There's all different kinds you can get. Um, but you're going to have to maintain it, right? It's going to have to be reapplied occasionally. Every couple of years, you're going to have to really reapply it, which is why people don't like to use it. And what happens is, it disintegrates over time and it feeds the soil, thereby reducing your need for fertilizer. So nothing beats old-fashioned wood mulch for water saving. And if it's too much maintenance, People can also add in boulders or rocks in an artful way, right, to make it look attractive. But mulch, mulch, mulch. It's very important. That's the end of this PowerPoint and my narration of this PowerPoint. I hope you enjoyed it. Of course, as always, feel free to email me or call me or text me with any questions.